Thanks for joining us today, everyone. My name is Julie Huffman, and today we are on our third webinar of a series of webinars for the 2015 CPP report. This webinar series will be covering off on all of the topics that were included in the 2015 CPP report. And today we're going to cover healthy, local, and GMOs. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jack Lee with Data Central.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie, and hi, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good week and had a good NRA. So we got about 30 minutes today, and we're going to cover quite a lot. Before we jump in, just a couple of small housekeeping rules. You have access to a lot of material within CPP, this deck, and a much more detailed version of it, too. And you can actually access that through the Data Central Snap portal. Just type CPP into the search box. All the reports will appear, and there's a lot of fantastic information in there. As a quick reminder, as you use this externally with customers, keep in mind that we encourage you to show slides and to build pieces of CPP in your own presentations, but the rule for sponsors is to not leave the material behind. And with that, we are going to jump into today's webinar. It's all about health and wellness. That is a very gigantic topic, and there's no way we could possibly cover it all inside of 30 minutes. So I thought what we'd do instead is focus on some of the big picture thoughts, if you will. So we're going to try to walk away from today with a couple of high-level themes as it relates to what health and wellness means today. So one of the first things, and this is probably not new information because you see it tattooed across the news everywhere, is that we have a relatively heavy country. The numbers that I'm always amazed at how honest people are in a survey about their their height and their weight and all this information. But when we calculate something like body mass index, we find that about 60% of Americans are overweight or obese, and about 30% fall into the obese category, which matches up pretty well with the numbers you'll see from the Centers for Disease Control. So we have a fairly hefty average size person on average in the country, and that's not something that we've really seen change a whole lot over the past few years. Despite all the initiatives to restore health and wellness, we haven't seen a reversal of the waistline, and part of that relates to what the objectives are that people have today as it relates to eating healthy or eating well. So these are the top goals that consumers have when eating healthy. You'll see at the very, very top, ranked with a couple of others that are close by, is to manage my weight. That is an old school approach to what health and wellness means. If we looked at the same question 10 years ago, you would see weight management at the absolute top, and there'd be a pretty large gap between it and everything else. What we've started to see over the past decade, and then some, is more of a clustering at the top as other things in addition to weight management begin to really enter the equation, and it's no longer about things like just fat and calories and whatnot. When people think healthy, they're thinking of a much broader array of things, the promotion of your overall good health, to maintain a balanced diet, or I think the really key one here is to simply feel good about what you put into your body. And that leads us to one of the first big thoughts, and this is something that we think is a great way to frame up what health and wellness means, is to think of it in terms of generations. We've been talking about this for a while, but we think of health and wellness in terms of three distinct generations of what healthy means. The first generation, which started in the 80s and continued into the late 90s and the early 2000s, is this notion of healthy 1.0, the notion that it's all about weight management. I don't want to get fat. And it was low fat and low calorie and low carb. And that worked for a while, and it's still pretty important, but it's not the only important thing today, which it was in the past. In the early 2000s, starting around 2003 and then really starting to crest in 2004, we saw a fundamental shift away from healthy 1.0 into what we call healthy 2.0, feeling good about what you put in your body, local, natural, organic, sustainable. Animal welfare belongs here, good for the environment. Things that maybe don't even have anything to do with nutrition in any objective way all became part of this feel-good umbrella, and that's really healthy 2.0. It's been the growing sort of driver for the industry for the past decade or so, and we think it's going to continue to grow. But in parallel with that, we see a third generation of health and wellness emerging as well, Healthy 3.0, which is about functional foods and beverages. It's protein as sort of the headline within that. It's antioxidants or superfoods or the delivery of energy through your foods and beverages. It's what can your food do for me? So if you think of it, in very broad terms, Healthy 1.0 was I don't want to eat things that aren't going to make me look good. And then we got to Healthy 2.0, and it was about not having bad things in your food and feeling good about what you put in your body. As we get into Healthy 3.0, now all of a sudden the conversation is shifting again to not just I don't want bad things in my food, it's I want food that actually does something for me, that has a functional benefit of some sort. And the industry is really just starting to get moving on this. We're seeing a rush of things like high-protein products all of a sudden, but we think there's going to be several smaller waves of functional foods and beverages following that. So my guess is most of the companies on this call today probably have a pretty good strategy in place for Healthy 2.0. If you don't have something in place for Healthy 3.0 yet, we think it's a great time to get a little bit ahead of the curve and start doing that now. So when we think about health and wellness and what it means for the away-from-home sort of dining experience or the opportunity to get people to come out and eat, we learned a couple of things. So there's an interesting, we call this a flashback slide because we actually took it from the prior year's study. And we asked consumers who say they plan on eating at home more often, why they plan on eating at home more often. And we looked at the folks who said we're planning on eating out more often, why they plan on eating out more often. And you can see for the people that plan on eating at home more often, sure, save money is number one. But look at number two. It's because at home is thought to be healthier food and beverage than what's available away from home. If you look at those who think they're going to eat out more often, why they plan on doing so, look at where healthy is on that. It's definitely not near the top. Only 10% of the folks that plan on eating out more say that health is going to be a driver for that. So we have a pretty big disparity here. And if the goal of the industry is to get people to engage in away-from-home eating and drinking more often, it seems like there are two big things that we need to solve for. One is the financial equation. You can see where save money is, really high for at home, really low for away from home. And the second is healthiness, that we are at a distinct disadvantage away from home in terms of what's perceived to be healthy versus the options that exist at home. And this is something that persists not just for the industry as a whole, but it applies to basically every type of industry venue or segment. Across all the segments in food service, whether it's a C-store, a QSR, a hospital, a hotel, you name it, only 11% on average believe that food service is healthier than the food that's offered at home. You could see what the numbers are in the opposite direction. Right? So on the right-hand side, we have the various segments broken out. The blue bars are the percentage who think that that segment offers healthier food than what's available at home. And the gray bars are those that think that at-home food is healthier. And sure, you have some modulation every now and then. Hospitals are thought to be a little bit healthier than colleges, which are thought to be more healthy than delis and recreation. But the bigger insight is that none of these have a majority share versus at home in terms of health perception. All of these segments are thought to be not as healthy as the food that's available at home. That is the big challenge that the industry needs to sort of correct for if we want to draw more people into food service. We can work on the value equation too, but the healthy equation is the other big barrier that we need to get around if we want to grow the away-from-home share of the dollar. And what we learn in all of this is it's not so much just about a specific health and wellness attribute. It's not a very particular thing. It's more this general notion that it's a mystery to consumers what is in their food away from home. If you're making stuff at home, you know what goes into it, right? You see what you're putting into it yourself. You know what the recipe is. You know the quality of the ingredients that are going in. If you're having something away from home, it's become a little bit more of a mystery box, and that's what consumers are skeptical about. They're skeptical about the healthiness of away-from-home options, primarily because what goes into that food is a mystery. So we could talk about ways that we could sort of eliminate that perceived unknown to bring more transparency to the process, and we've had a lot of initiatives in the industry that address this, but there's still a lot of mystery that surrounds things overall. And if you ask the folks who say, hey, I think food at home is healthier than food away from home, that's basically 90% of consumers. Almost every consumer says food at home is healthier than what's away from home. And you ask them, why do you think it's healthier than food service options? The number one reason, by a pretty wide margin, is because I can control what goes into the food in my home. So I think it's not just about transparency, which the industry is starting to do something with. It's also about the notion of giving the consumer some control over the options. We've seen things like build your own platforms across a number of different menu categories become more popular over the years. Perhaps an aspect of that also gives the consumer control over the perceived healthiness of the items that go into that item would be helpful as well. So think about transparency and also think about restoring some control to the consumer so they can really modulate what it is that they're having and not have it be a mystery if it's healthy or not. And I think that will open up the floodgates to additional food service revenue opportunity. One thing that we do know, though, and this is a thing that is diametrically opposed to the desire to eat healthy, and the desire to eat healthy is nearly universal. Almost every consumer says this is something that's important to them, sometimes a little bit more important than others, but everyone says it's pretty important to them. However, there is this thing that we call the healthy abandonment rate, right, which is the notion that you went out and you wanted to get something healthy, but you ended up getting something that was not healthy. Maybe you saw something that was so amazingly craveable and delicious that you're like, you know what, I wanted something healthy, but I'm going with the burger instead. Or sometimes it's because you just bump up against the mystery and you don't really know what's in there, so you just order something and you can't assume that it's healthy anymore because you have no idea what's in there. You just sort of assume that it's not. But there's a pretty large percentage of folks that go out with the intention of having something healthy, but end up not doing so. They end up having an unhealthy choice. 37% of trips where the consumer intended to order healthy result in them not ordering what they perceive to be a healthy item. So there is significant white space that we want to sort of help close. And I think there's a lot of things that fill that white space. One is more menu options that are both craveable and perceived to be healthy. Two is the notion of transparency and control, that the consumer has the option to actually go for a healthy option. A lot of times they are not able to sort of get something healthy because it's just not available to them. But that's a big chunk. Almost half the time, 40% of the time when people want to have something healthy, they end up getting something that's not healthy. So we want to find a way to close that white space for them. The other thing I'd want to point out, too, is we're just sort of skimming the surface here. There is an enormous amount of information within the broader sort of CPP material. And one of the key hallmarks of CPP is that we look at occasions, the different sort of trips that people have away from home and the underlying sort of motivations behind them. And you can see that when it comes to something like healthy eating, whether people actually go out and have something healthy, it actually changes pretty drastically depending on the type of the occasion, right? So if you're out and you're having a formal dinner or you are impressing someone, more than half the time you ended up choosing something that you thought was pretty healthy. If you wanted for a quick bite or a cheap bite, that number drops precipitously to only 14 or 18%. That's a pretty wide dynamic range. So what we want to sort of help solve for is the desire to have something healthy is a pretty sort of universal trait, but it seems like it's not being fulfilled for a number of these occasions. And again, it comes back to the availability of those options, how they're communicated to the consumer, and the level of transparency and control. So I'd say in working with your customers or just sort of in building your own internal healthy strategy, are there pieces of sort of white space that you can help fill? Is there something we could do to offer a healthier option for a quick bite or for a cheap bite? It's not often fulfilled now, but we know that consumers are interested in having something healthy and often regret that they didn't have a healthy choice that they ended up selecting. So what can we do to target some of that? We also see that this changes pretty drastically, not just by occasion, but by segments. People are more likely to pick something that what they perceived to be healthy when they got something from a hotel or a lodging establishment or from a fast casual place, and much less likely to do so when they were at a C-store or at a recreation venue or even at a QSR. Look at how large the gap is between fast casual and QSR, despite being, similar in sort of format. They're both limited service. You're almost twice as likely to have picked what you consider to be a healthy option at a fast casual place. So a lot of times you hear, hey, fast casual is just QSR plus a few dollars. That really ends up not being true. There are fundamental differences in the reasons that people visit fast casual versus a QSR, and there's also a fundamental difference in how often a healthy choice is selected. So I'd say, again, working with whatever specific customer you may have in mind, see if there's a gap for them or for their segment in the healthy selection that the consumer makes, and let's develop some ideas to fill those gaps. I think it's interesting, too, if you ask consumers, hey, would you rather have something indulgent or something healthy for various types of items? So the pink is for any item from salads all the way down to desserts. The percentage of folks who say they would prefer a indulgent version of that item. And the blue is the percentage who say would prefer a healthy version of that item. And what you start seeing pretty quickly is the items where people most say they want a healthy version tend to be those same items that are traditionally thought of as healthy anyways. Salads, juices, smoothies, soups. And on the flip side, the ones where they're least likely to say I want a healthy version are the things that are probably traditionally already regarded as being indulgent: pizza, appetizers, and desserts. So I think a lot of this is just how consumers have been conditioned to think about different product categories. The near-term piece is you probably can't fight this too much. If someone wants to have a pizza, they probably want to have a pizza. In the long term, if we buy into the fact that certain categories will grow and some will shrink, and that consumers are going to continue to be motivated, and even more so in the future than today, by an urge for something healthy, we may want to make sure that we have something that's perceived to be a healthier option in any one of these categories. Because if you're in one of those categories that is sort of towards the bottom here, if health and wellness continues to grow in importance to consumers, those categories may organically shrink as a result. The good news is, remember, health and wellness does not mean just fat and calories anymore. It means all those other things. Healthy 2.0, local, organic, natural, and healthy 3.0, those functional items. So look for solutions within your category that can address those next generations of health and wellness, and I think you'll be well protected for the future. The other thing that's really interesting about perceptions of health and wellness among consumers is that it is extremely fickle. There is no one equation that determines what people think to be healthy. So we asked consumers, hey, here's a whole bunch of items. We had like 100 items or so. Tell us if you think it's healthy or not. And you can see that it's sometimes minute differences that will change the perception of whether it's a healthy dish or not a healthy dish. So in the case of that very top example, this is the percentage of folks who think that it's healthy, right? Spaghetti, if it's with tomato sauce, it's thought to be healthier than if it is made with meatballs. The type of the sauce and the inclusions in a pasta dish is a determinant. Whether something is grilled versus fried, the grilled chicken sandwich versus the fried chicken sandwich. The type of crust that's used for a pizza. Thin crust pizza is thought to be healthier than a thick crust pizza. The type of potato used in fries. Sweet potato fries thought to be much healthier than regular fries. The presence of an NHW call-out, sugar-free versus a non-sugar-free item. Whether an item is served by itself or in a salad. Fried chicken on a salad, healthy. Fried chicken by itself, not so healthy. And the list sort of goes on and on. There's all these little triggers that can impact what people think to be healthy versus not. Breakfast bakery versus dessert bakery. A blueberry muffin versus a cake or a cupcake objectively probably has pretty similar looking nutritionals, but that blueberry muffin is thought to be, much healthier than a dessert bakery item. Fish and chips versus fried chicken, both deep fried, but the fish and chips is thought to be healthier than the fried chicken. So there's a lot of nuance to this, and if you're working with the customer to build a healthy strategy and to bring items to the menu that can be positioned as healthy, you probably need to test each one of those individually, because there is no one-size-fits-all formula for what is thought to be healthy. There's a lot more nuance to that, and it tends to be much more item specific. We also found some other interesting things. I think from a gender perspective, it's that women tend to be a little more on point and concerned with health and wellness than with men. So on the left-hand side, we have items that men are more likely to think to be healthy than women. And on the right-hand side, we have the opposite, items that women are more likely to think to be healthy than men. So look at the women on the right, right? They say quinoa salad, a turkey burger, a baked potato, a strawberry smoothie, all these things that probably feel sort of healthy. And look at what men say on the left. They're more likely to say fries are healthy, or mashed potatoes, or a thick crust pizza, or fried chicken. And it's not really because they're more likely to think of it as being a healthy item. It's because women are more sensitive and are more likely to think of it as being an unhealthy item. And you see that pretty clearly here, right? The pink line is women. The blue line is men. If you look at the peaks and the valleys in terms of do people think that these items are healthy or not, the women, the pink line, have higher highs and lower lows. They're more sensitive to this overall. So I think we probably all, get this instinctively that health and wellness might matter more to women, but we have objective data here that suggests that too. And if you're building out an NHW strategy, keep in mind that it's probably going to target women first and foremost as a result. What you also have as part of the CPP material, which is great, is we've tested a number of different NHW terms in terms of what's appealing to a consumer that they might see on a menu, for instance. So without going into each one of these specifically, just know that you could refer back to the CPP chapter on health and wellness. You'll have all this data here. You could look for call-outs that you could bring to the menu that will have appeal and also communicate health and wellness to the consumer. Okay, we got a few minutes left. We'd like to really quickly talk about local and what that means. So one thing that we know about local, and we see this on things like restaurant menus, so this is from our menu trends service, is that more restaurants over time for the past decade very, very consistently have been specifying local on their menu. They actually use the word local to describe how they're sourcing product, and that number has grown at a pretty quick rate. 50%, nearly 50% of consumers say they've noticed more places calling out local on their menu as well. So it's clearly sort of trending up. The question is, what does it actually mean? Well, the thing that we know is the vast majority of consumers, about 70%, say that local is better. But a lot of those consumers who say that local is better don't really have a specific reason why they think it's better. It just sounds better. So there's a couple of layers to that. One, local we find to be an extremely positive term across most menu categories, but it's not something consumers can always explain. They've sort of shortcutted into accepting that local is a benefit. When you ask consumers, well, what does local mean? Does local mean that it was made in that city? Does it mean that it was made, somewhere in your state or in a neighboring state? Does it mean that it was just produced anywhere in America as long as you know the source of origin, or any place at all as long as you know what that origin is? What does local mean? And what you find is there is no universal definition, right? There's no consensus definition on what really local means to consumers. It's really, if you boil it down and we go a layer deeper and we ask consumers, well, why is this appealing to you, and what does the sense of local mean? It's more just they want to know that it came from someplace that was perhaps reasonably nearby, but the specifics beyond that aren't really that important. It doesn't have to be just that city. It's just knowing that it came from some place that's not mysterious. It really goes back to that piece that we saw earlier, that there's a lot of mystery that consumers perceive when they go out to get something to eat. Local is just a way of bringing a little transparency to that, of demystifying some of that mystery, and having to say specifically that it came from a certain town or another, that was near to you, is not nearly as important as just removing some of that mystery is overall. And if you ask consumers, well, hey, what are the benefits of local? Freshness, supporting the local community. Those are really sort of the top two. Grown by your local farmers and growers. That's sort of part of it as well. And that seems to be the big piece. But I'd say even more so than this, consumers don't always break down all of these attributes in their mind. most of the times they've just shortcutted into accepting that local is better because it's removed some of that mystery for them. And some drawbacks, well, the drawbacks about local as perceived by consumers aren't really drawbacks about local itself, because the top ones here that it's not always available or that it's sometimes expensive when it does appear. So the notion of local itself is mostly positive across the board, and the only things that are thought of as maybe being a drawback aren't really about local itself. It's about the lack of things that are local, or that it would cost too much when that does come into play. You see, too, though, that some items or some ingredients or some things on the menu align better with local than with others. So we see it as being a pretty positive thing across menu categories. But when it comes down to individual ingredients in some cases, things like produce benefit a lot more from a local call-out than do others. If you look at things like soft drinks or condiments, less so than for fruits and veggies. And finally, there's some concern from consumers, or I should say skepticism from consumers, that certain types of places can do a good job with local product, right? 88% of consumers think that independent restaurants can do a great job with local products and local sourcing and local ingredients, but less than half of that amount think that a fast food chain could do a good job. So it's not always just about offering it, but if you fall into one of those sort of segments where there's a little more disbelief that you could do a good job with local, you probably need to not just offer it when you offer it, you need to also justify why it's something that your operation can do a good job with. You may have to communicate a little bit more in that case. Last couple of minutes, we'll talk quickly about GMOs. So I always think this is sort of interesting. A surprisingly large number of consumers, even when we tested this last year, were already familiar with the term GMO. 70% said they were familiar with the term, and almost half at that time, 45%, said they know what GMO stands for. And we wanted to make sure they really understood what it stood for. So we asked them not just, do you know what it stands for, but why don't you tell us what it stands for? And they would type in their response. And they were pretty accurate. 93% of those consumers who say, I know what GMO means, specifically reference the word genetic or gene. So it's not a false read. You have a pretty hefty percentage of the country that is familiar with the term. Nearly half understand what the term stands for, and when you ask them what it is, they actually really do know. And about 42% of those folks say that it is a bad thing. There's not a whole lot that say it's a good thing. There's a bunch in the neutral territory, but 42% say this is a bad thing. And if you look at what that level of awareness is for GMOs, you see that there's certain demographic groups that tend to be more aware, and we put boxes around a couple of them that we thought was sort of interesting. One, progressives. If you'll remember, we have those different types of eaters in America away from home. And the progressive eater is one of the more important sort of segments of the eater population, because they're more likely to talk to their friends and family and recommend things and see things at an early stage. They're more aware of GMOs. Millennials are more aware of GMOs. Hispanic and Asian consumers, acculturated, are more aware of GMOs, and people that go to the gym a lot are more aware of GMOs. So a lot of those folks that are in positions to sort of be a particularly effective word of mouth vehicle tend to have an elevated awareness of GMOs. And if you ask, well, hey, do you think GMOs are a good thing or a bad thing? It doesn't really matter what type of consumer you are. You're much more likely to think that it's a bad thing than a good thing. And this is one of those things where, scientists will often say, hey, the public has sort of got it wrong. We've really positioned these the wrong way, and it's turned into more of a marketing battle than anything else. A lot of sort of the people on the frontier of this say that there's really no hard evidence that these are objectively bad for people, but there is a very strong perception, an overwhelming perception across all consumer types, that GMOs are a bad thing. And what it really comes down to, when we ask a little deeper, like, hey, why do you think this is a bad thing? I think someone just did a really not so great job in coming up with the term a long time ago, because genetically modified just sounds extremely scary, right? It's just a scary sounding term, and I think it really sort of boils down to that if you ask consumers, hey, why are you worried about this? Why is it a concern? It comes down to, the notion of something genetically modifying something that I'm putting in my body. It just sounds really scary, and you get comments like this, something that's genetically modified is never a good thing. It's not natural. This is not real food, and a number of other testimonials from consumers as well. And I think that's probably going to be one of the larger issues that we're going to face over the next 5 to 10 years, is what we do with this. If you have Chipotle saying we are going all non-GMO, and you have other sort of restaurants and operators sort of jumping on the same thing, but at the same time scientists are saying, no, this is really not a big deal, we're going to have to resolve that as an industry. But I think there's a broader lesson in here, which is the words that we use are really quite important. If we picked something that wasn't quite as terrifying sounding, it probably wouldn't be nearly as big of an issue as it is today. So I know we've gone a little bit over. This was, as Julie said earlier, our third webinar in the series of CPP reports from the prior year. And it's our first where we got into a specific topic. The past two were more about general things happening with consumers. The remainder of the topics that we'll be doing in this webinar series will also be specific topics as well. And again, you could access all of this from your Data Central Snap portal. Just type CPP into the search box, and all of those reports will appear there magically for you. And with that, I will return this to Julie, who will help us sign off.
Thanks, Jack.